All right, hello and welcome. As folks make their way into our Zoom room today, I'd like to just welcome you to Wild Farm Alliance's The Role of Birds on the Farm online course. And here at Wild Farm Alliance, our mission is to promote healthy, viable agriculture that helps to protect and restore wild nature. And this course specifically helps teach ag professionals and farmers how to support beneficial birds and manage pest birds on farms. And my name is Brian Fagundes. I am the program coordinator for Wild Farm Alliance, and I'll be both moderating today as well as presenting some information on one of our projects. So as usual, we like to kind of cover some of those Zoom guidelines. If you've been with us for the previous 9 courses, amazing. Thank you. If this is your first, welcome to the final one. So you should notice that all of your screens should be muted, and you'll be muted throughout today unless we ask for some audience input. You should see a poll up on your screen currently. Hopefully you're using the most current version of Zoom. And in that poll, we're just asking for some information to help us understand who our audience is today. And at the end, as we go through today, we're also going to have some polls asking you questions about the content that we're covering. And don't worry, none of it is graded, and we're not going to report your answers to anybody else. If you are experiencing any technical issues, both myself and Shelly are in the chat and are here to help. As well, in the chat, you can plug in questions so that we can answer those both during our presentations as well as later on during a question and answer period. So today, hopefully you're here to wrap it all up in our lesson 10 to hear about prioritizing what birds prefer on farms. And this is the agenda for today. So we're going to have 3 speakers, not just 2 today. So we're really upping the ante. And it's going to begin with Joanne Baumgartner, our Executive Director at Wild Farm Alliance. Then we're going to move on to Sam Earnshaw, who has the group Hedgerows Unlimited. Then I will be presenting third, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time to answer any questions that weren't answered during our presentations. And with that, I think we've got folks filling out the polls there. Again, reminder, if you have any technical issues, feel free to plug into the chat. And in those polls, if you happen to close it and didn't finish filling it out, just know that it can be found down on your Zoom toolbar with an icon next to your chat icon. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Brian. I am going to share my screen. Yeah, we are here in lesson 10, prioritizing what birds prefer. I'm Joanne Baumgartner with the Wild Farm Alliance, the director. And besides Brian, Sam Earnshaw is my husband. And so you'll be hearing from him, and it's going to be fun doing this presentation with all 3 of us. So as Brian said, this is and you can see this is the 10th and final lesson of this course. However, we are planning a couple more related events. And so that's what this slide was about. In about a month from now, on Wednesday, August 31st, we are offering a peer-to-peer information sharing with you all who have participated in this class so that we can hear what you learned, what you thought was most important, and learn from you too about what you're working on and in your effort to support birds. Then a month later, on Wednesday, September 28th, we are presenting on a beneficial bird habitat assessment and native plant tool. And you'll be hearing today about a little bit of that and a derivative of a chart we've created from that tool. So that will be not just open to participants of this course, but to everyone. So please mark your calendars. I hope you can attend. So this tool, which helps determine how to best support birds, is being finished. While that's happening, we want to give you a preview of what it will entail and also share a cool native plant chart that comes of it, which actually I'll show you in a few minutes. And these are the learning objectives I'm going to go over. Sam is going to cover farmscaping opportunities and plant characteristics in the tool. And Brian is going to cover what plants birds prefer or how many birds actually use plants for native habitat, food, and nesting. So I'm gonna get started and talk about landscape influences. This is an image of Parducci Vineyard, which is in Ukiah. It's kind of north of the Napa-Sonoma region, but not that far away. And their property goes kind of like this. And the reason why we put this circle around the area is just to try to get a sense of like this from the center out is a kilometer, about 2/3 of a mile. And looking at that area, which is about 800 acres, we're figuring there's about 15% of natural or semi-natural vegetation. So if you're a bird that likes oaks, for instance, you're probably being supported by them in some of these areas and or riparian habitat. Small birds like chickadees and titmice primarily forage in territories near their nests. They're only moving out a couple hundred feet in any one direction. And this chart, small acreage feeding ranges of, like you can see, this oak titmouse will use about 6 acres. And chickadees are using about 4 acres. They have to be close to their nest because, like, for instance, a chickadee will feed their young about 150 times a day. So they can't afford to go really far. They have to have food there. And so that landscape influence or what is there on the farm and or adjacent to the farm, depending on where they nest, is important. Whereas with prairie falcons, they typically have feeding ranges close to 2 miles. So, and that range is shaped by the metabolic rate and their food availability. Barn owls have around the same feeding range, although they will go farther, depending on, if food isn't that available. And they are feeding an average of around 6 rodents to their young a day. So they don't have to make 150 trips, and so they can go farther too. And they're bringing much more food when they do feed their young. So this chart is a larger acreage feeding ranges, and you can see that barn owl, then that translates to about 8,000 acres it's foraging, and prairie falcons a little bit less than that, versus like Cooper's hawks is down to 600 acres, but still that's a lot different than the chickadees and the titmices. So then if you consider a farm like this, where maybe there's 1% of the vegetation is natural or semi-natural, this kind of farm is probably not going to support a lot of those small insectivore species. While they could be eating a lot of pest insects on the farm, it's probably not a big enough diet, or the insects aren't there for the full nesting period, and so they wouldn't have success at raising their young. Whereas larger carnivores, they probably would be foraging in a farm like this, because they move so much further, and there could be lots of rodents there. So it's not that farmers have a lot of influence over what's beyond their borders, but it is helpful to understand why birds show up and what, how it relates to what they need. So here's image of our chart, our beneficial bird native plant chart, and I'm gonna give you an overview of it, and then we'll dig in. So here on the left is the common name, the genus, and the species of about 160 native plants. And while these are California plants, there are a lot of these plants occurring in Washington and Oregon, or in similar plants with the same genera are across the country. And so anyways, this middle, middle column is about plant characteristics, and Sam is going to go over all of that. This other column, bird species use of plant genera, Brian will cover, and then right now I'm going to cover climate benefits. And as you can see, there's 3 different symbols, which I am going to go over. And the first symbol is, we show this symbol of California. The striping isn't so important as just it's a symbol of California that means that 3 or more regions of California, and we've broken it up into 6 regions. If 3 or more of those regions are, the plant is present, then this symbol will show up in our chart. And as an example, this is a map of Blue Elderberry. It comes from Farmscaping, the mapping does, and you can see that it occurs over almost all of California. And so as the planet warms, we are thinking it's very likely that this plant is going to be around because it is so adaptable. It can grow on the coast where it's cool. It can grow out in the middle of the valley where it's really hot. It can grow at high elevation. It's just super adaptable. It's probably going to be able to take a lot of drought or too much water. And anyways, here on the right, you can see there's a Phainopepla has been enjoying that blue elderberry. Whereas the coast buckwheat, this is a map of the coast buckwheat, it doesn't occur in 3 or more regions. And so we don't list that as a climate benefit on our chart. The next symbol of the 3 in the climate benefits section is about storing carbon. So that's this leaf with the CO2 on it. And this oak tree, as you might imagine, stores a lot of woody biomass, and that's because it's a big tree. It can get big. This is another kind of oak. You can see as they get older, they just store lots of carbon. But shrubs too, like this elderberry, can store carbon. Not as much, but certainly much more than an annual flower. Small annual flower. And this chart is showing carbon storage that occurred on one farm where they found that 18% of the carbon was stored in 6% of the land. And right here, this bar is showing riparian habitat, which is where most of it was stored. This bar is showing hedgerow, and a lot of carbon was stored there. The white is the tree, or almost white is shrub, and then there's litter and roots and carbon in the soil. The next symbol is with a calendar with a leaf, and that's about plants that provide year-round cover, i.e. evergreen plants like this fir tree behind this sleepy owl. And it's all about how as the climate warms, birds are going to be stressed. And so the more year-round cover there is for birds, the better they're going to be able to survive from the elements, from predators. And yeah, so also here's another example of chipping sparrows that would benefit from year-round cover of this pine tree. And I actually am gonna stop there. And you, Shelley, you could put up the questions.
It looks like folks are filling out your poll right now, Joanne.
Yeah, well, it looks like everybody's getting the answers right, except for golden eagles actually have a really large range, much more than 1 acre. And other than that, I think everybody's really got that figured out. So why don't we switch to Sam presenting now? And we'll see if any other questions come up later. So continue.
And the nice thing is usually, you know, we'd be switching to somebody else in another computer in another room or something. But look at this. We got 2 for 1 today. Hi, Sam.
Hello, Brian. Hello, everyone. So I am going to be describing different types of farmscaping opportunities to support birds. And this will include things about hedgerows, windbreaks, area plantings, things on banks or berms, erosion areas, and even areas with grasses can be vegetated, and then different sizes, tall, medium, short, widths, and talking about evergreen, riparian, deciduous, and flowering periods that support, and fruit that support food for birds, and then why multiple plant species is good. So do I forward it?
Yes, you just hit this arrow.
Okay.
Oops.
Questions.
I think I
So
put that
there
wrong.
is an example of going out in the field of the farmers and we looking at a thing, and he's saying do it over here, and I'm saying, well, what about over there? And it's kind of identifying the opportunities where some are better, and you know, they also contain issues like, is irrigation available there, and are there any other issues? So choosing the opportunities is the first step, and a lot of fun going out onto the site and just walking around and choosing places that, and again, keeping an eye on some of the things Joanne was mentioning about the landscape, what kind of birds are around in areas off of the farm. This is a picture of a riparian area that are really productive. The plants grow rapidly. And they provide food, nesting, and cover for about 75 bird species in the US. So riparian areas are a great place to be able to do some farmscaping. This is an example of on the top picture is this, it was this degraded blue line creek. A blue line creek is one that has a blue line on a USGS map. But it was right next to a farm. And the lower slide shows how we were able to come in there and plant a variety of trees and shrubs that provided many benefits for the farm. Habitat for birds, of course, and then beneficial insects. And so there's an example of an opportunity to, yeah, this is a picture of that very same area. But, you know, riparian areas are great opportunities to plant. And these are pictures of the trees. This is up on the right. That was on San Benito River. And that was like just barely less than a year old that plant grew that big. And this was on Tres Pinos Creek, is in San Benito County. Again, 2 years worth of growth on these cottonwoods. We did black cottonwoods and Fremont cottonwoods and a number of other things. And with good irrigation, and you know, these plants really like to grow. That was a really wonderful success there. Hedgerows and windbreaks do support birds. And so this was a planting we did out near Firebaugh in the Central Valley. And it's the upper left picture is the way it looked, and there was nothing there. And we came in and put in this hedgerow that also had some trees in it. You can see what it looked like 8 years later over there on the right. And this, here's an example. It looks like there's a bare area, there's nothing there, but eventually this hedgerow windbreak did bring in habitat for animals. It created habitat for birds and animals. There was a coyote created a nest out there, and the insect, this was a cotton farm actually there was cotton there, and there was almonds all around it. So it kind of did establish a connection to an almond orchard. And so that's kind of where the wildlife came from. And the scout was out there looking for insects, and a snake came out from underneath and just scared the heck out of him. So it just shows that, you put it in there and you make the habitat and they will come. And this applies obviously to birds as well. One of the things is, you can see this is just along a farm road out kind of in the middle of the farm country. And that's an important consideration. You want to try to stay away from busy roads. They say 100 feet away from a road makes it safer for birds. This slide shows a hedgerow that was planted right on Highway 5, which is a busy interstate. And there's an almond orchard there on the right, and we don't know who planted this, but we were driving down there and just noticed it. However, this close can be dangerous for birds. You see barn owls getting hit alongside the road, and ravens come down and try to pick stuff off, and people are going by 80 miles an hour. So while it probably does provide some benefits for the almond orchard on the inside, it is creating a danger zone for birds. And one of the NRCS biologist was saying it's really unfortunate to create habitat that then puts birds into a dangerous situation. But it's kind of one of those 50-50 things, because there is some habitat there as well. So it's a consideration though to have and be aware of. Nice wide hedgerows are great. If this farmer, this is Live Earth Farm in Watsonville, outside Watsonville, where the farmer wanted to create a zone between a native redwood oak ecosystem, mixed evergreen ecosystem there on the right, and his farm fields on the left. And so we put in a 2-row hedgerow there, and down below he had room. He wanted to do a nice 3-row hedgerow, and this turned into nature kind of took over, and it became an evolving ecosystem. And so they don't always have to just be one single line. It's nice to, you can, if it's available, it's nice to have a nice wide one. And that also gives you ability to use plants that can get wide. These plants, as we'll look at a little later, they can get anywhere from 8 to 20 feet wide. And sometimes, planting where they don't need to be pruned is, if they're coming out on a road or something, is important. So width is a great consideration there. This is a 5-year hedgerow and shows how tall hedgerows provide a lot of canopy and different sites for birds and food. There's elderberries, there's ceanothus and coyote brush and toyon and coffeeberry in this hedgerow. It's Phil Foster's farm in San Bernardino. It's a wonderful hedgerow that has a lot of diversity in it. And here's a windbreak. Likewise, it's showing how it's not planted on a really busy road. And this it provides, again, a nice quiet thing. And it's also tall and has a lot of habitat possibilities. Near habitat near something noisy like this pump, or in a busy barnyard or shop area where birds can't hear songs and warning calls. So it's, being sensitive to the birds' environment and the human environment and this also applies to the busy roads. So looking here at the beneficial bird native plant chart, which is a beautiful, colorful chart. It's broken up into large, medium, small, and vines and grasses. The plant characteristics there on the left, where there's this red circle, is that shows it's evergreen, and this shows that it's deciduous. These are different characteristics, and so this this is a choice when making plant selections, and some farmers, and for the birds, having evergreens is good, but a lot of the riparians have deciduous trees. And so using this this website, Calscape, is put together by California Native Plant Societies, and one of the maps that Joanne showed with the elderberry and the coast buckwheat were from Calscape. It's an amazing resource. They have all kinds of information on it, but this is where the information from the evergreen or deciduous came from, and also the size of the height or the width. And then for flowering characteristics, the chart describes how many seasons the plant provide floral and food resources for birds. So these, some you can see are less seasonal than others, some are the whole year. And that data comes from these charts. There's again, Calscape. This CalFlora is a good website. There's a NRCS connection there that really is a good resource for finding plants in specific areas. And then this website over here is again another NRCS USDA website, and this shows the fruit and seed production beginning and ending. And that's, when you can tie that to flowering periods, because these fruits and seeds follow the flowering periods, but it's good information to be able to access. And this is a chart that we've developed in this. If you this manual here on the right, we put together a few years ago. It's called Hedgerows and Farmscaping for California Agriculture. It's available on the Community Alliance with Family Farms website, caf.org, or I have a website, hedgerowsunlimited.com, and you can find that there. And I think, but what this shows is if we just put one species out in a hedgerow, you just get a very short flowering period. If you put many, you extend your flowering period over the whole year. And this opens up the variety. It gives birds a lot of opportunities. It gives you different species of birds. And it's also good for the success of the plants. When you have that many, if some of them aren't doing well, some the other ones will be, and you go to replant, you know which ones are doing well. So this just is another benefit of, or a feature bringing in biodiversity to the farm. It's great to see. Like if you look at that hedgerow picture on the manual there on the right, you can see there's a variety of plants. And one of the other things is farmers really like this. Joanne and I were farming for many years, and farming can be sometimes, no, I won't say boring, but it's just the same thing over. And introducing these kind of things in there is really something that it widens the whole experience of farming, and the aesthetics and the beauty is an important thing. And I'm sure the birds really react the same way. These are some pictures of some birds eating some of these resources. This is a wax myrtle, which is a really nice 30-foot tall tree that's evergreen, and it's a great tree, and it has these wax myrtle berries. The spotted towhee, honeysuckle, the plant, grows and has fruit over the 4 seasons, and the birds are using that, and it's a good spreader for, putting vines in a hedgerow is a good technique. There's some other vines that go in there too, but it's not just shrubs and trees. It can be all kinds of things, and even grasses. Deer grass is a really nice grass to put into a hedgerow. Penstemon and these shorter flowers, like we see hummingbirds all the time coming to the penstemons and drinking, and that's nice to see those flowers. And then this is Oregon grape, Berberis. It's an early bloomer. The almond growers really like this one because it it flowers at the same time when their almonds are flowering, and the bees, it helps support the bees, and then the birds come in too. And then here's one that we don't plant very often. As a matter of fact, never. It's called poison oak. but it's very common in the ecosystems all over California. And they have berries. The birds really like the poison oak berries. And then sages, this is the sages that are in the mint family, salvia. And they have lots of flowers, and they're very attractive to the birds and also the bees. And it's a good, strong hedgerow plant. So looking again at now caterpillars, when you see a lot of moths, you know there's been caterpillars around. And this chart on the plant characteristics shows which of these plants really support a lot of caterpillars. And when Joanne was doing her thesis on codling moth in apple trees, we watched, she mentioned chickadees do 150 visits a day or something, and it was amazing. And caterpillars is one of the things that birds really like. They're big juicy morsels, and they bring them over. And this is a slide showing the black oak, Quercus kelagii, which is a common tree in California, but oaks are tremendous hosts for caterpillars. And this picture came off of Cowscape again, and they show so much information on that. But this just gives you a sense of what a food house, what a grocery store for birds that these oaks can be, and these other plants that support caterpillars and so on. And you know, one of the things about using native plants is native plants, all these moths have evolved with these plants. Like, they don't kill the plants, and so it's a thing over time. And one of the things about non-natives, a lot of non-native were brought in specifically because they don't have insects. And oak, they're great on the lawn and all that because there's no insects. But if there's no insects, there's no birds. So it's really important to try to stay with the native plants. And this oaks are just, you know, until you look at this thing and realize that oaks are an amazing food source for birds, excuse me. And then willow trees, these categories, very many, there's these categories on the chart and then the assessment thing, but willow trees are great. They're like riparian trees. They're deciduous, but they're fast growing. And we had an area on one of the farms that was eroding a whole bank. And we went in and we put rows and rows and rows of willows in there. And now it's a forest. And actually, we did that in 2 areas on that farm. And so we created a little riparian forest on the side of this eroding hill. And now it's got everything in it. It's got, you know, it's brought a lot of biodiversity, and it's brought a lot of birds into it that never were there before, at least. Ocean spray is a deciduous shrub, and it has many. There's a category very many and many. And then this bladderpod bush is more of a drier area plant, but it still hosts some caterpillars. And that's what's really interesting. Again, going to the Cowscape website and for looking at some of these plants. And if you're working in a desert area or a really dry area, and you get the species that are there, and then you can go and see what kind of bird resources are available. So that's about it for me. We have a website, Hedgerows Unlimited, and it's a pleasure being able to work with Joanne and Wild Farm. And my questions are really hard. Which 2 plantings have the most benefits for birds? Near a busy road, 100 feet away from a road, riparian planting, or next to a noisy pump? So those are really hard questions. And the second, do I do the second one now? Sure. The second one is, when designing a native plant, why is it better to have a mix of plant species? For floral resources, seeds and fruits can be available, or birds just like colors. They just come to see colors. So
awesome. Yeah, Sam. So while folks are answering those 2 really tough quiz questions, we did have a question come in for you.
Okay.
And it actually was perfect timing because at that last caterpillar category, you mentioned that was a more acidic, dry area plant. And so this question is related to water. And they asked, in regions where water is scarce, such as California, we sometimes get pushback for planting non-crop trees or bushes that may compete for that water. So is there research out there, or do you know any information about planting more trees or shrubs that actually increase water retention or availability in the soil?
Well, that's a really good answer to the question right there, Brian, that one of the functions of these habitat plantings is to increase water infiltration. And the other thing is, you know, these hedgerow plants don't take that much water. It's kind of a it's important to know that when we set up a system, say near a field, we'll put a drip system in, and it just needs enough water to get it going and keep it moist for about 2 or 3 years. And then after that, they don't need any water at all. And I don't think they're pulling water out. It's more like you mentioned, the infiltration is there to go in. I mean, there's other people who know more about this, but the one thing that I have learned over the years is that getting one of these things going is not a huge demand on water. And so farmers are able to do this. That one I showed in the Central Valley was one where a little more water was needed, but it was a fraction of the water that they use on the crop. And there's people also who know more about this. I see Louise Jackson is on here. I'm Rachel Long. There's other people who could answer that question as well. But I mean, it's a good question. Water obviously is a consideration, but designing a good system and just being aware that they don't take that much water, just enough to keep them going for a couple of years, and then they take off on themselves. So I hope that's an adequate answer.
Yeah, that was a wonderful response, as always. Thanks, Sam. And so it looked like we closed the poll there, and as expected, folks really rocked the answers on that one. And so I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. And again, if you have any questions for both Joanne or Sam while I'm speaking, feel free to throw those into the chat. So again, yep, I'm the program coordinator for Wild Farm Alliance. And so I had the joy of working on this, this new tool and the chart that I got brought on to work on. And so really what I'm going to focus in on is what native plants support the birds with these 3 different types of habitats. And so that it can be found within our chart in this column here. And so you're going to see these 3 different symbols: a bird perched on a plant, a bird kind of going down looks like it's picking up some seeds and nuts, and then a third symbol here where it's actually a bird sitting on a nest with some eggs. And so just an idea of what this color scheme is, if you look on the right here in our key, the darker that bird is, the darker blue it is, that means the more bird species are associated with that plant on our chart. Whereas the lighter blue it is, the less bird species are associated with that. And I'll describe more what that means about the number of birds. But first, I wanted to actually cover what these different habitat categories are and what those values are representing. So we have a symbol description at the end of our chart, and it just lays out how we broke up those different categories. So those plants that support 20 or more bird species are the ones that get the darkest color. The moderate category has 5 to 19 bird species, and then the lowest is that they support at least 1 to 4 bird species. So when I mentioned bird habitat type, these are the 3 categories here. So general is really a very broad description of what habitat is, and pretty much it covers almost the entire natural history of a bird. So it could be where they roost, it could be where they loaf, it's where they can sleep at night, it's where they forage from, either perching on and foraging out to go grab an insect out of the air, or where they're actually gleaning insects off of branches. That plant could also be what they use for breeding or nesting. Then the second habitat category is food. Now, food is not speaking about if they forage from this plant or if they're eating insects on it. really what this category means in our chart is, are the birds consuming parts of that plant for food? So it may be berries, it could be nuts, seeds, or nectar. It's the actual food resources that that plant provides from itself to a bird. And then the third habitat category is nesting. So this category includes both, does the bird nest on or build a nest inside that plant? So imagine a cavity within an oak tree, or maybe building a stick nest on top of a nice tall pine tree. Or does that plant also just provide materials that a bird would need to collect to build its nest? So think of the fine weaving of grasses that birds will make a grass nest out of. So where did all this data come from? So it was decided that we wanted to try and find a database that had a lot of good reference material. And so the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has this wonderful online resource called Birds of the World. And so if you're not familiar with this, the idea is this is a program that stores tons of data about almost every single bird species of the entire globe. And so what you're able to do is you're able to plug in a species of interest. So today I'll just show you the count for a Western bluebird. And the idea is it has information about what it looks like, as well as how to identify it. But then if you look on this bottom left here, there's all these different categories of information. And so when you scroll down a little bit farther in that page, you can see that there's this wealth of information about the natural history of every bird species. And so what we did is we went through in these 3 different categories that covered those 3 different habitat types. So this habitat box here is the general habitat. The second box is the diet and foraging. And third is the breeding or nesting information. So what we do is we click on to those tabs. So here's that first tab on habitat, and we copy all of the text that's present within that. And we created a program that would then search through for key terms within that text to pull out those plant species that are within our plant list. And so for this habitat description for Western bluebird, you can see it pops up. There's pinyon and juniper and pine fir forests, aspen, these oak woodlands, Douglas fir, and the key here is that there's both the genera, or a common name for a group of plants such as pinyons, junipers, or pines. So that's a very general description of the plant, but there's also more specific. It actually lays out aspen as Populus tremuloides, or Douglas fir as its scientific name. And the idea is our database then would categorize each bird and whether it had associated plant genus or a plant and species association with it. And I'll describe why that's important in a little bit. So then when we went to the diet and foraging section, we went down to the major food items. And again, the food habitat is just what are the parts of the plants that the birds are eating. And Western bluebirds here forage on a wealth of fruits from nature. And so you can see that there's elderberries and grapes and mistletoes and docks and all sorts of wonderful plants. And here again, some of these plants have just a genus listed, and some of them have the full genus and species Latin name. And so what we did was we then plugged that into our chart here. And if I have time, I wanted to kind of share my the idea of what this actually ended up looking like on our database, because you can imagine, how do you possibly get 160 bird species information plugged into just this one simple chart? But looking at time here, I think we'll probably just continue on with my presentation, because I don't think I have enough time to show you a little bit of a view behind the hood. But again, today is kind of a teaser almost for this wonderful resource that we will be putting out later this year. So looking through this plant chart again, Again, I want to now focus in on those plants that have the really dark colored bird symbols. So those that have high associations. And so for that general habitat category, these were our top performing plants, meaning within our large shrubs and trees category, these are 4 of the genera that had the most bird species associations. And so in these graphics, you'll just see the genus name, and then in parentheses is just the number of bird species that was associated. So you can see here the 4 rock stars of our shrubs and trees are the pines, the oaks, our aspens, cottonwoods, and the salix, which is willows. And so when you look at the species within our plant chart, of course, we don't have every pine and oak and willow that grows in California, but from our selections that Sam has either used in his hedgerow plantings or commonly found around California farms, these are those plant species. And you can see here that right now I'm just talking about their general habitat quality, but you can see that for some of these plants, they are rock stars for not just general, but also food and nesting. So for general habitat plants that are medium shrubs and perennials, maybe you don't want to plant these large growing trees. We have the Artemisia, Berberis, Atriplex, and Ceanothus that all support a variety of bird species as well. And some examples of those plant species are sagebrushes, salt bushes, Berberis is the coyote brushes and mulefats, and then Ceanothus borrows its common name from that genus there. And now going into the food plants that provide food habitat. Out of the large shrubs and trees, we have Sambucus, which is the elderberries, Rhus, Prunus, and Quercus that are all supporting over 20 different species of birds from our data set. And examples of those plant species are the holly leaf and Catalina cherries, all sorts of wonderful oak trees that grow in California. And then Rhus, commonly known as sumacs, but really in California in our farmscaping list, that's the lemonade berry and the sugar bush. And then Sambucus, which was the rock star that supported the most birds in our list, are the elderberries. And so for the top nesting habitat, you may have noticed that the best trees and plants for both general habitat also are the same top 4 that are for nesting as well. So that's again our oaks, pines, willows, and the populus, the aspens. They're not quite in the same order as the general habitat, but the top 4 were the same for both general habitat as well as nesting habitat. And I did want to clarify that these bird species totals here that you can see, this really is a conservative estimate. This is just the data that we derived from Cornell's database. So more than likely, there's going to be far more bird species that actually use these plants and collect food resources or nest within them. But we wanted to start with a good foundation steeped in the literature. And then through later versions, we'll be able to really bolster that with more on the ground information. And with that, really just can't wait for you to explore this chart to see the wealth of information that are here. And in a couple of months, we'll be sharing that full tool, and it really will be fun to explore these native plants and all the different 160 birds on our list that those plants could support. So now we're going to just cover a couple of poll questions like you've been used to doing for the prior 2. And hopefully this just gets you to focus in on what were those plants that really supported most bird species. So the first question is just asking about the general nesting habitat plants. And the second question is asking about the food habitat plants. And while you're filling that out, I think I did see a couple of questions maybe roll through. All right, so one question is asking, will current native plants become less successful as the earth heats up? If so, should we be planting plants that will become native in a hotter world? So that sounds like a question for you, Sam. Did you want to field that one real quick? Or maybe Joanne, it's really asking about that climate impact side of things.
Yeah, well, we think, like we showed with the blue elderberry, plants that have a wide range in California will very likely be adaptable to changing climate. So those are going to be the plants that are going to be around in the future. The plants that have a really small range, the endemic range, they are likely, maybe they'll make it, but it's not going to be, a sure thing. For all the reasons we've been talking about why native plants are important, I would be hesitant to suggest that non-natives be planted. In our previous talk by Ashley Kennedy, she discussed and Sam discussed how important native plants are to supporting caterpillars that birds eat. And Ashley pointed out that a plant like a ginkgo tree, which is from China, only supports 3 caterpillar species, as opposed to over 100 or 150 that some of our oak species support. So we do really have some rock star native plants that are that have wide ranges that will be really important to plant as we move into the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanne. And I think we'll wrap up the poll there. It looks like folks really, remember that those oaks and pines are really the plants that are at the foundation, the keystone of so many habitats throughout California. But the elderberries and sumacs, or the honeybush, those are the ones that provide food resources for the most bird species. And again, I want to just remind folks that in that plant chart that we have, the bird data is specific to the bird species from that Cornell Birds of the World data, but the information that Sam covered as far as those seasons of the year that provide food resources for birds, that provides you with an idea of what the plant is likely providing for the birds. We just don't have the data to back that up within our current tool. And so with that, I think we're ready to kind of start wrapping up. If you have any final questions, please plug those into the chat. And I'd like to ask folks if they could complete this final poll that we have. So this really is to help us report back to our funders, which is Western SARE, that we are putting on these webinars that really hopefully were entertaining and engaging and thoughtful, and have introduced enough information that you now have more maybe questions than answers, because at the end of the day, this really is a launching off point, right? We want folks to be able to start engaging with their landscapes and start thinking about how their plants fit in with their farms and all the wonderful birds that those plants can bring in. And so while you're filling out that poll, Joanne or Sam, did you have any final thoughts for us today?
Let's see. I guess I wanted to point out that in those landscapes that may not have a lot of natural and semi-natural habitat, it still can be important to plant something there, some native habitat. And one of our first speakers in this course was Sarah Cross, who studied, among other things, alfalfa, and how birds were eating 33% of the alfalfa weevil. And she saw that there was a significant increase in the number of bird species present by just adding 2 trees next to a field. So birds really gravitate towards that habitat for food and cover, and then move out into the field to provide that great pest control that we all want to support.
Yeah, and I want to say that since I've been working or being around Joanna, she's worked with this concept of beneficial birds. I've been planting hedgerows for over 25 years, and a lot of times farmers will say, well, I can't do that because it's going to bring in the birds. And what we're learning and being able to share with people is all the benefits that birds bring, and all the science and the research that you all have been doing on that is really important. And to see people kind of changing their attitudes, like when you point out some of the science showing that the birds are really beneficial, and the good and the bad balance each other. It's not that birds are terrible. I mean, I remember one time we were planting a hedgerow and the farmer goes, well, we're going to get all these birds now. And I said, well, the birds are here anyway. They're all over the place. And it's not like they bring in more specifically in one area that when there's other vegetation around. But anyhow, the point being that the beneficial effects of birds is really nice to see become more distributed, that knowledge to people. So
Yeah, and I think we have a wonderful video, right, that we've released as Wild Farm Alliance about don't be afraid of birds. We really describe that relationship, that when we create that habitat for birds, we are acknowledging that there may be some birds that are attracted to these farms that may be pests. But the idea is there's techniques and ways of managing those pest birds. And in general, there's far more beneficial birds that are going to come to these plantings that are then going to disperse out into your farm and provide all sorts of wonderful benefits. And so I think we've pretty much got everybody to fill out the poll there. So thank you very much. Wanted to remind you that we will be continuing this benefits of birds and their roles on farms concept into August and September. So this really is almost a year around adventure learning about birds on farms. So we encourage you to join us both in August and September, where we continue to engage with this information and then celebrate in September the release of this tool that we've been working on for a long time now. And with that, we just want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you for posting information as well in the chat here. It's really been helpful, and just a reminder that we are Wild Farm Alliance. So we're here to bring information and bring organizations together across the United States and abroad. And so if you ever have wonderful groups that are doing things that makes you think of us, feel free to shoot us an email with that information, because as somebody pointed out, Doug Tallamy is a fantastic researcher, and much of his data has gone in to the resources that we are providing to you all. And with that, I think it's time to wave a feathered wing, and thank you so much for participating in these 10 webinar series that we've put on. And with that, we encourage you to keep it wild on your farms. Have a great day, everyone.